Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast, where we focus on how authors found success, looking at strategies that have taken them to the top of the bestseller charts, as well as what they've learned from their mistakes. Because being an indie author is more than knowing the latest marketing trend. It's about being innovative and creative and learning from your mistakes.
Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. I'm Sara Rosette.
And I'm Jami Albright. And this week on the show we have
Kerstin Espinosa Rosero.
Yes, we do. She's one of our new authors.
Yes. So this was a good interview. It's got so much great information in it. Mm-hmm. This was actually a listener request. Mm-hmm. Some of our listeners wanted to hear from her, particularly because she's writes dark fantasy. Mm-hmm. And it was just so much fun to talk to her and get her perspective on publishing. And you know, she's only got a couple of books out, but she's just gone about it in such a unique way. Like she started with her artwork.
Yeah. I thought she was very wise.
Yes.
I don't know. Yeah. I thought it was a great interview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, you know, we talked to her about like how she found her cover artist, and we also talked to her a lot about like how much backstory she includes and world building, a lot of fantasy type elements in this podcast. So
yeah,
it's coming up.
Yeah, it's great. It was great. So what's been going on with you?
Well, I'm pretty much over COVID, but I'm just really taking it slow. It's like everybody talks about how tired you are. And so I was anticipating that. So I'm like just doing maybe one or two things a day and just trying to not overdo, which is, you know, I sit at a desk all day, so it's hard to overdo. But mentally it's taxing, I guess.
It can be for sure.
Yeah. So, but I created the draft for my Kickstarter page. I'm working on that. And, so that's pretty much, I'm just catching up on all this stuff that's kind of been lagging while I was gone. Right. And then the other thing I have to mention, I'm so sorry, I forgot to mention this earlier. I was on the Behind the Book podcast a couple of weeks ago. And then with the travel and getting COVID, I didn't mention it. I totally forgot. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And we talked about like writing a series and like writing mystery and cozy and just, it was a fun interview. I had a great time with them.
That's great. That's great. I always forget when I'm on stuff or, you know, it's like, did we mention that already?
I know partly because we record early and then we comes out later and I'm always confused on what days and time zones are not my strengths.
No. And speaking of Kickstarters, Claire Taylor's Kickstarter is just, I mean, I think she's up to 200 backers, or she was really close.
Yeah, she's doing great.
So it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fun to watch the other, I know that when it's the one I'm doing, I'll be stressed, but it's fun to watch other people and go, oh, they're doing so good. This is great. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's good. I'm glad you're taking it easy because it can be hard to get over that. I mean, just to bounce back. I don't bounce back. Yeah.
No, and I don't think I had a really bad case, but you know, it just slows you down. So, but anyway, so what have you been doing?
I'm still in Dallas. I'm teaching swimming lessons while I'm here. But if our listeners are the praying kind, my family could use your prayers. If you're the light and love kind, we could use your light and love. My sister has deteriorated really over the last couple of weeks, and we got some not great news. But then they called back and said, well, it may not be as bad as we think. And so we'll find out more tomorrow. What is today? Thursday? Yeah, Thursday. So I'm not sure how much longer. I may stay up another week just to be close. And it's been real hard, y'all. But I will tell you this, and, you know, I mean, this is a fun podcast. We really do try to have fun, but I just always want to be honest. And I was at my mom's yesterday with her. And she's staying with my mom because her husband works during the day and she can't be left alone. I mean, she's really having issues. And my mom has a sectional sofa, and my sister was, laying on one leg of the
part
sofa.
Of it, yeah.
Yeah. And I was laying on the other, and I was holding her foot. And for a moment, I kind of panicked. I mean, we'd just been laying there all day, pretty much watching TV or whatever. Mm-hmm. And for a moment, I panicked and thought, I should be doing something. I should be doing, I'm not writing. I'm not doing anything. What? And then I just had the most vivid moment of clarity that nothing else matters but what I'm doing right now. Yeah. Nothing else. I mean, yes, our careers are important, and yes, we want to do well, and yes, we want to write books for our readers. But you know what? If I never write another book, my readers will have already loved the books I've written, and they will wish me well and find other writers. If I do,
they're not going to be mad at you if you can't write a book. And that's one thing we all forget.
No. And I can still market the books that I have and sell them. It's not as much as I was making, but it is enough. And I don't know. It was just this moment of clarity. But I had also been feeling while I was just flat on my back on that sofa, it's like, I don't really know that I can get up. I am emotionally exhausted, and it's not about me, because Lord knows nothing I'm going through even compares to what she's going through. It's just in those moments when really you can't do anything that what you're reminded of and what is important. So for me, that was that moment. And anyway, so if anybody else is struggling, no, you're not alone. For those of you who have gone through this, God bless you. Honest to gosh, it's one of the hardest things our family has ever had to do. And certainly,
you just are having to take it moment by moment,
literally 1 second at a time. Yeah, because if you let your mind wander, then it goes to bad places. And there's just not a lot we can do to help her at this moment, because we're waiting to see what's next. And so I mean, it's hard, and this is just life. What I'm experiencing is not at all unique. And I don't want anyone to hear me and think, oh, well, she thinks she's the only person that's ever been through this. That is not true. I know that I'm not, but until it happens to you, you really don't realize how much people have to go through when they have a loved one that's really ill. So, anyway, but all that to say, no writing, but I'm taking care of my family, and I'm trying to love my family well. And again, if this turns out to not work, if this turns bad and stays bad, I will not regret one word that I did not write to be with her. So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. And you don't want to look back and think, oh, if only I'd done something different. You don't want to do that. No. So you're doing exactly what you need to do. And being high empathy, I know that it's like a heavy weight.
It's hard. I mean, I haven't cried. It's weird. But I think it's because I'm trying to make sure my mom's okay. And my sisters are okay.
You're caring for everybody else.
Yeah. And my daughter said, you're just going to fall apart one day and you'll be okay. But I mean, I have walked around a little bit in shock, kind of like I was very indecisive one day. I couldn't decide if I should go there or not. It's about 30 minutes away. And my daughter went for a walk and called me and said, Mom, get in the car and go. I know you want to go. You just need to go. I was like, thank you for saying that, because I can't make a decision. I can't, So anyway, all that to say, it's just, writing is hard. Life is harder sometimes. So give yourself a break. And if you're not going through this and you're at one of those kind of peak times in your life, just be grateful and enjoy it. And just know that, it's a gift. It's a gift, and be grateful. And anyway, so that's it. We should probably get on with the show before I take us all down into the pit. But this really is such a great interview. And I really did get off because she's also young.
Yes.
She's in her 20s. And I really did get off the call thinking, this woman is so wise.
Yeah. Like, it's going to be interesting to see what she does in the future.
Yeah, it really is. Cool. It really is. So let's get on with the interview.
Yes. Okay. So here's Kerstin.
Today, we're excited to welcome Kerstin Espinosa Rosero to the podcast, and we are so glad you're here.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Glad to be here.
We're glad to talk to you.
Yeah, so. Kerstin's in Germany, so we may have a bit of a lag sometimes, but maybe not.
Yeah, we'll work it out. So let me read the bio real quick, and we'll jump into the questions.
Kerstin Espinosa Rosero is a Filipino-American author of Burn Red Skies who somehow finds herself in odd places, whether it be hiking across Germany to draw castles, training in a boot camp in Thailand, or practicing Chinese calligraphy in Taiwan. Through her experiences, she realized that the story was in the journey, not the destination. I love that. So tell us how you got into writing, Kerstin.
So I actually did a lot of art. My younger self was really inspired by video games, so especially old school RPGs like Final Fantasy and Suikoden. Yeah, right. Which I always thought was just a gorgeous visual way of storytelling. So it had gorgeous visuals, but also beautiful dialogues. And I sort of started drawing a lot based on that. And then at some point I started writing to sort of give my drawings a story.
I love that. And actually, I read that somewhere about you, though, that you drew some of the images, and then the story came later. And I love that. That's great. How long ago did you start writing?
A few years ago. So it's my first attempt. So because this podcast is about things that you wish you'd learned before you started writing, it's still quite fresh in my mind. All the mistakes I made.
That's always good. That's always good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think your story is interesting because a lot of people come to writing first, and then if they have an artistic ability, they may make a map or, may do their own covers, but you've come at it from the artistic side first. So I think that's really interesting.
I love that. Yeah. And we should mention that some of our listeners requested that we have Kerstin on the podcast because they love your books and they love your writing. And so we just want to see what you have to say today.
Oh, thanks.
Well, so how long did it take you to write your first book?
Because I was doing it on the side to, life. It took quite a long time. So it took, I think, a total of 4 years. But it wasn't like I was writing nonstop. It was just if I had time at night or all that good stuff. And when I started writing, I didn't have enough money for an editor. So that took more time of me second guessing myself constantly and like all the stress and sadness that comes with bringing a book baby to life. So I would say a total of 4 years. Yeah.
And then dark fantasy how long are your books?
So Burn Red Skies is, I think, 427 pages, which for dark fantasy isn't that big, actually.
No, it's not. But I think that also adds to the cost of editing because, it's usually a word and
your writing time too. Yeah.
And your writing time too. So,
before I did any edits was over 1,000 pages. So I cut it down.
Wow. That is hard too. Like, and then to do it by yourself without an editor to kind of walk you through that or help you through that process. That's amazing.
It hurt. It hurt a lot.
It always does. Editing can be painful. Yeah.
What do you wish you'd known about marketing before you published your books?
About marketing? Well, I mean, I'm still making mistakes in marketing, so this is actually the perfect question. Like I said, it's still fresh in my mind. So when I started, I told myself I would say yes to every form of marketing that would come my way just to try it out. So you have paid ads, you have book tours, you have paid reviews, unpaid reviews, giveaways, all that good stuff that you see on Bookstagram. So what I didn't think of is that the author landscape is changing You know, it's changing quite a bit and quite fast. So if you're a new author, for example, and you post on social media like, hey, you know, I have this new book out, you'll get a bunch of requests from people offering to give your book a review for a fee. Or maybe, you know, you'll find a book blogger you like, or sort of look into ads like on Amazon or Facebook or whatever. So what I found, and obviously this is only my experience, maybe people are luckier than me, which, you know, I'm probably sure they are. If you sort of contact or are in contact with people who offer their services for a fee, like paid reviews, you really need to look closely at what you're getting yourself into, because, you know, what you have often is, you know, you see accounts of people reviewing books and they have a lot of followers, they have like hundreds of likes and comments, but often it turns out they're part of like and comment pods. So their followers have to like and I mean, like you can tell basically. So I fell into that trap as well, which is okay because it was part of my like Kerstin's 100 experiments project. But you live, you learn. So, you know, I've paid for some blogs to expose my book, like for the marketing, not necessarily to review it, especially on Bookstagram. And that's worked because there's a difference between people asking for money for them to review your book and for them to sort of market your book.
Yes.
And what I found is that many prominent book blogs do reviews for free. But it's like only the reviews. They're not going to market it for you.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, that is great to know. And it's great for new authors to know, because actually I was probably published for more than a year before I was contacted by somebody that says, hey, I'd love to review your book. And I was like, oh, great. And then she was like, that'll be $300. And I'm like, what? No. I actually
and
have
a copy
some
of the
reviews that are, you know, free. And so, but I was kind of thrown off by that. So it's good because I think when you're new, you are a little bit like, I won't say desperate, but, you know, you really want those reviews. And so it's easy to fall prey to that. So I'm glad you brought that up.
I wouldn't say desperate. I think I would call my newbie self vulnerable.
Yeah. You just want the reviews, and that they're so hard to get. You know,
you don't know where to start.
No, you don't know where to start.
Yeah, there are some like legitimate review sites that they charge to like bring your book in and assign it to a reviewer. And you have, you know, like you don't know if you're going to get a good review or a bad review, but those are usually very pricey. So I wouldn't recommend that for a new author. I think, you know, that's and it is a place where a new author can kind of feel like, oh, I need to pay this amount of money to get a review. And you're probably better off just trying to find readers, you know, but that's hard too. That's a whole nother
thing. But, you know, Booksprout is a good place because they have a free program. And, you know, again, you're not guaranteed a good review, but you are guaranteed a review.
That someone will look at it.
Yeah.
So I mean, just like my only word of advice for new authors is just really look closely into what you're getting yourself into. Like there are some legit sites, of course, but sometimes you'll you know, fall prey to people promising the world for a few bucks.
It pays to be cautious, especially when you're starting out. Well, what do you know now that you didn't know when you started? What do you wish what are some of the things you wish you had learned early on?
All right. So I thought writing was a solitary affair. Like, you know, you have that image of eccentric, introverted curmudgeons, you know, just at their typewriter. And, you know, writers always get pegged as starving artists, you know, so, you know, chilling in cafes and like eating croissants or whatever. But like, I completely bought into the idea that we would be competing for resources. Like I'd be legitimately terrified of other writers because I'm not competitive at all. It's quite harmful. And this is what I've learned. It's very harmful to treat readership like a limited resource. Like especially in the indie world where like, or indie fantasy world. I can't speak for other communities, but I'm sure it's similar, where it thrives on solidarity and not competition, especially because authors are more often than not fellow readers in that community. So like once I started building these connections and learning friends, like not just to readers, but to fellow authors, you know, fellow artists, editors, you know, just the entire community, I started learning more, and my book found more resonance, and some positive, like some negative, and some absolutely rageful, but you know, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have to say, like, making friends with fellow writing nerds is not a bad place to start.
Yeah, it is a very supportive community. And most authors, I think we do spend a lot of time on our own. And so if you can find those connections with other writers, then, you know, nobody is going to care as much as another writer about like your title or, you know, just things that we obsess over that like our families.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And our families are like, why do you keep talking about this?
I don't care. I love you, but I don't care. I don't understand. And a lot of times I don't have the energy to explain stuff to people not in the community enough to have a conversation with them. You know, it's too much. So yeah, it's always great when you have people in your community that you can bounce off the ideas off of and just be there for support. I love that. And I love what you said about it's not limited resources.
Right.
And I just think that's awesome.
Yeah, I was very briefly part of a writing community that shall remain unnamed, and it was quite toxic.
Yeah.
In the sense that people were ostensibly supportive, you know, like you get critique on your work, you read other people's work, but then once some authors started finding success, and sort of breaking away from the pack, then people turn vicious. I mean, that's, and I think, you know, talking to some author friends, that happened to them too. And for new authors or aspiring authors who are listening, if you are in that sort of dynamic, just run. Like, it's not worth it.
Right.
Like, cut your losses, run, find a better supportive community, because I do think as a whole, the writing community is quite supportive. They have your back.
Yes.
Because we all know what it's like.
Yeah, exactly. Ugh. Yeah. It is hard. But it's hard to get kind of caught in one of those groups and not know how to get out. And you just need to leave. You don't owe them an explanation. Just leave, because
it sounds like an unhealthy relationship, but it's right, you know.
When they're at work, you leave. So it's not good. Where did you eventually find an editor, or did you kind of do the whole thing yourself? And
I did the whole thing myself, actually, but I think for future projects after the series, I will definitely look into getting an editor, you know, just have a second opinion or third opinion on what I'm writing.
Right. And then the second part of that question is, and you're cover designer, but you design your own covers, correct?
No, I didn't.
Oh, you didn't?
I'm going to advertise my cover designer.
Oh, good. You'll lose him or her, or they, but go right ahead.
No, that's fine. She deserves all the commissions in the world, really. Right. Her name is Francie Stern, or I guess Franziska Stern. And it's great that her last name means star, because that's what she is.
Oh, wow.
Very cool.
Yeah, that is very cool.
We actually, we found each other on, I think, 99 Designs. Is the name of the website. Like, she was just sort of doing it for fun. And then since then started doing it professionally, which is absolutely amazing. And I'm surprised she didn't do it sooner. But yeah, she's my cover designer. I've never complained. I've never had reason to complain about her work. And she's just an absolute joy.
That's great.
So
That's great to work with. Go ahead, Sarah.
Do you find it, since you're an artist yourself, I mean, I often feel like I don't have the words or the description of when I try and communicate with my cover artist, my cover designer. Did you find it easy to work with her? Were you able to convey what you wanted? How did the process go?
Well, she knew the title, and she was also formatting my book, because I'm pretty hopeless there. So I guess, she got the gist of the story. And based on that, she just just went for it.
Yeah. And it's great. I mean, they're great. Yeah. They're great covers. Yeah. And they fit that genre. Is it adult or is it new adult dark fantasy?
I would recommend it for like 14 plus. So
okay. Yeah. Yeah, because it really fits in there with those with books like that. It's great.
Yeah. So like we'd been communicating, writing. She's also based in Germany. So at some point we just sort of developed this weird telepathy. So she just took it and ran and, never had a reason to complain.
Oh, that's great.
That's wonderful when that works, when you can kind of get that like synergy going where like somebody gets the books and then they can kind of create. It does it, like when you're writing a book, sometimes you'll have I always have kind of like a vague picture, kind of fuzzy about what the cover might look like. Does it match was it like, oh yes, this is it when you saw her work?
Yeah. And I mean, I have to say, like, I like drawing. I like making art, but design is a completely different beast. So yes. I put it in her hands and she just took it and ran.
That's so smart, though. I mean, there are a lot of people who are very artistic that would not have done that. They would have tried to hold on. So really and truly, that is so smart for you to let the person who has expertise. And I think that's important for new authors to kind of understand, like, you're going to work with people that just know more than you about certain things. And you need to just let them know more than you and learn from them instead of trying to compete with them or butt heads with them. And I think you made a very good decision because those covers are awesome.
Yeah, like writing is so personal. So I can see, drawing too, and I can see exactly why, we get attached to our work. But this was one decision I did not regret at all.
That's great.
Well, what's been your biggest surprise?
Like in terms of just
either the writing, the publishing, like what has surprised you the most about the process?
Oh, nice. That was a good question because I was completely overwhelmed. I completely underestimated the reach that technology gives us now, because you have direct publishing, you have social media, you have like just the entire book community on social media, and like, to be honest, I thought my friends and family would read it, like if that, like my mom maybe. And when I first released my book, somehow it ended up in Japan, and I had no idea why. Until I found out, like, one of the people following me on Instagram, for example, is from Japan. And you sort of underestimate it, because then once you start finding readers all over the world, Amazon sort of picks up on that and starts showing your book to more readers, and then it just sort of spirals. And I think that was what overwhelmed me the most. Like, if you imagine it in the real world, you walk in expecting like your parents maybe, but then you have like these different people, expecting, and you're like, I'm very grateful, but it's very overwhelming. I think that's what surprised me the most.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's a great answer. That's just, and I think it's that way for a lot of us. That we think, oh, this is just something we've done, and nobody will see it. And then the next thing you know, somebody from across the world is.
Yeah, I get so excited when I get emails and you can see the characters, like where it's from. Like when you hit reply, it'll show you the characters, and sometimes I'll copy and paste them. And I'm like, look, this is in Russian, or this is in Hebrew, or, it's like things that, I wouldn't have expected. And it's just the reach of books now is just incredible.
Like I wanted to say, like, back then, before social media and all that, you would just go to a bookstore and pick out what looks good, basically. Yeah. And I mean, with indie publishing, you can't find books in a bookstore. So the fact that we have this reach is really amazing. I think it's not something we had, I think, 10 years ago, or just very limited at the time.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm curious, did you have any debate about whether to try and get your book traditionally published, or were you always pretty sure you wanted to go indie?
Like, this is also a fun question because, I feel like if you're an aspiring author, like you don't know much about self-publishing. You know, you always think like you find an agent, you get into that business. And, you know, that's where I started with, you know, I was looking for an agent and had some very positive feedback on my manuscripts. But then they started making suggestions on what to change. But they were very, very big suggestions, for example, and I wasn't ready to let that freedom go.
Right.
So I think it could have gone either way, to be honest. Sometimes I wonder, like, maybe I could have, you know, like just changed that one thing that's completely, you know, completely crucial to my story. But
but like one of the main points or something.
And you know, you have that image of somebody with like a contract, like, you know, the whole selling your soul thing. Like, is it worth it? But like in the end, I'm glad I went through self-publishing because, you know, I could contact artists by myself. I could sort of be more involved in the indie community and make it sort of a hands-on experience.
Right.
That's great. I feel like though now you could maybe do both. You could, you know, do hybrid publishing if you wanted. That's the great thing. We have a choice. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and I think this, like my first book, Burn Red Skies, and the sequel now, Rise Red Kingdom, have been such great learning experiences for me because, you know, I always thought there was either or. It's like, all right, if I'm not doing traditional, then I'll do self-publishing or vice versa. You know, you never know.
Yeah.
But now I'm learning about hybrid publishing. And it's like, is that a possibility too?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. What's been the hardest thing and what's been the best thing about indie publishing?
I think it's not like the hardest thing, but over time, it's kind of the biggest burden of indie publishing is just the stigma attached to it. You know, like, there's still a lot of like, oh, you know, like, I guess you couldn't find anyone. So
you're not good enough.
No wonder.
So,
like, you know, if you say like, hey, I wrote a book, and, you know, the person you're talking to is like, cool, you know, what's it called? It's like, oh, it's, you know, I Burn Red Skies, it's self-published. And then you see sort of like the light leave their eyes.
They're like, oh,
yeah.
I think it's just that divide, that stigma, which, you know, fortunately is getting like, is getting less and less over time, but it's still there.
Do you think it's worse in Germany than it is in the States? Oh, like overseas, maybe in Europe in general, than it is in the States? Or
I think so, actually, because I think, especially, I can only speak for indie fantasy.
Sure.
I think there's just a huge, like, just a bigger community in the English speaking world for it, which is a shame. Like, I think it might be like my next goal, like maybe in the next life, to sort of champion indie rights in Germany.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe because also we talked to Ricardo from Renzi, and he was saying that really until the pandemic, most people in Europe were buying books from the bookstore, or they were ordering physical copies of the books. And so they couldn't really get those. So there was this increase in ebook sales in Europe. And I feel like a lot of that is because they were buying traditionally published books as opposed to indie books. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I was just curious. I think that's an interesting question about just the stigma overseas and versus other places.
Yeah, like I would actually say the stigma is a little stronger in Germany, but I can't comment on like all of indie publishing, only with fantasy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think here it's sort of seen as kind of a kids genre, which is a shame.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and you know, you can't blame anyone because Harry Potter was aimed at kids, you know, and they made fantasy sort of big back then, you know.
Yeah.
Well, so what's been the best thing
about indie publishing?
Yeah.
Just the community. I mentioned it's more hands-on. So you're dealing with people who know exactly what it's like. So you're kind of scrubbing the ship together, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Love that.
And, so you have more access to potential beta readers. Obviously, if you also are a beta reader, don't do that toxic writing community thing of getting beta readers but never beta reading.
Yeah.
Just having a wider access through word of mouth, because just having that audience who has your back and they know what it's like because they're also writers.
Yeah. So have you had to make a mindset shift? Y'all, that I almost cuss every time I ask this question. Have you had to make a mindset shift in indie public, like in your journey of indie publishing?
Yeah. Like I mentioned, the reach was just so vast. I wasn't expecting it at all. And I think that makes a huge difference, because you're like, all right, if you write for your neighbors or like your family members, it's quite different than like writing for strangers across the world.
So the biggest rabid fans of your genre, that's
so you get like some nitpickers who you don't know.
Yes.
So just sort of knowing that your words are reaching someone you never like in your life expected to reach. I think that makes it harder in some ways, because now I'm writing my third book and I'm like, oh no, but what if that one rage reviewer in I don't know, in Japan is disappointed. So that's like the biggest mind shift that I've had to do, just dealing with the vastness of reach and social media and direct publishing, like all this new technology that you sort of have to learn
on the fly
at once, and usually, like in my case, it was by myself. I didn't know any author friends at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Jami.
Well, I was just going to say, I agree. I mean, I think that having to do it alone is so hard. And it's when you make those connections that, I mean, writing is hard or publishing is hard, but it makes it so much better with the community. Yeah.
I think also this is also a plus with indie fantasy, because you're also dealing with other indie authors and talking and making friends. I don't know what it was like for you. When I first wrote my book, it was like I was second guessing everything. Like everything was being scrutinized. Yes. Like, is this my absolute best? Or like, what about the semicolon? Or is this like an M dash or whatever?
Yeah.
Is this dialogue natural? But like, I think with the second book, it's still there, that nervousness, but I think you're a bit more forgiving with yourself. I don't know if that's what it's like for you, or if at some point you just get so exhausted with yourself that you just go with it. But
either way, either way.
Yeah. I think you always have a little bit of the nerves. I mean, they may not be as bad as with the first book, but I think they do. Or you learn to control your nervousness better, maybe, and from past experience it was okay, and so it will be okay this time. I don't know
exactly. I don't know either. I always think it's when I started writing, you don't know what you don't know, and then now I know what I don't know, and so I'm like, I hope I can hit that mark every time. But again, you do have to just kind of go, this is what I wrote. Love it or hate it, it's what I wrote, and I wrote the book, and I love the book.
Well, we wanted to ask you a couple of questions too about writing fantasy. So, do you have any advice for somebody who's starting out and writing in the fantasy genre?
I think it's like, I guess you might agree as well. The most important thing is to just write. Right, my first draft was 1,000 pages. It was full of info dumping, just like, this is what the world's like. These are the rules of the magic. These are the characters. One has a shady past, that sort of thing. Just write like unabashedly, just write all of your thoughts down. That's the most important part, is just getting it out there. And at least what worked for me is that after I had all of these thoughts down, like a character that makes an appearance for 2 seconds had 5 pages of backstory, like then you can start sort of cutting it down. And it'll get easier with, I mean, it hurt a lot, but it'll get easier with time. Just sort of refining and cutting it down.
Right.
And you just sort of figure out what works for you, you know, like it's fantasy, which gives you a lot of, you know, freedom to invent your own rules and do what you want. But it's also, you know, not an excuse to be all powerful. So, you know, having, you know, my book has dragons and interdimensional dragons, but they're not the most powerful thing in the world, because that would be slightly boring if they just won all the time.
Yeah.
So, you know, once you have all these thoughts out, once you start editing it, sort of pick apart the weak spots of this magic system, and then you can sort of introduce challenges to it, like believable conflicts to it that make characters believable, that make the story sort of high stakes.
So were you a fantasy reader, a dark fantasy reader before you started writing?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's always been my favorite genre. Also with movies and video games. It's just a form of escapism that's a bit more obvious, right? Because you literally have dragons and airships and all that good stuff.
Yeah. I love dark fantasy. I love fantasy in general, but I love dark fantasy too. And I think it would be really hard if I were to write one to not info dump on the, you know, the world and then the magic system. I mean, I just think that would be the hardest part of it all. How did you decide, you know, what needed to stay and what you needed to cut?
That's a good question. I'm still working on it because I cut my book down to 400 plus pages from 1,000. I have gotten like criticism that my book doesn't say enough about its world, like the opposite of info dumping.
Wow.
Some readers loved that it was not the opposite of that it was the opposite of info dumping.
Right.
But for me personally, I just thought, can readers continue reading without being completely and utterly lost? Do they really need to know like what temperature fire elements are? You know, like does that really contribute to the story?
Right.
And just accepting that for some readers it will be yes, and for some readers it will be no. Like the important part is what you know, what you think as an author, like what, you know, how you want your voice to sound in this magic system. And I mean, there are just a lot of readers who prefer different types of magic systems. Some want like, you know, pages of rules, like 1, 2, 3, and some people don't want any rules, you know. So
yeah, I think probably it's similar. Like I write historical mystery, and so there's some people that they want a lot of the history and they want the background, and then there's other people that they're not as interested in that. So you kind of have to find what you want to write, and then hopefully you find the readers that is the match for them, you know? So yeah, I think it's within each subgenre, there's going to be levels of what people want as far as detail and background and stuff. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, trying to please everyone is, I mean, in my opinion, the best way to write like a really sort of mediocre book, like not in terms of quality, but if you're trying to please everyone, you won't have your own voice,
right? And
it could be very well written, but you know, if it doesn't have its own strong voice, I think that can be a huge problem.
Yes,
I'm just shocked. I mean, I'm so surprised that you've only been doing this for, you know, what, 5 years, 4 years?
It's like 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years. I mean, you're so knowledgeable and you're so wise, and you're also young, which is great too. You got a long time to do this, but you are very wise about that. I think there are a lot of people that just sacrifice their voice to please readers in every genre. And I think you're smart not to do that. So I love that. So let's talk about your art, and how do you combine your art and writing? I mean, like writing was fun for a while, I'm sure, but now you do it and you're selling books. And so is art now the thing you do as fun, or do you combine the two? And are you still drawing pictures that you think that kind of go with the story?
Well, the funny thing is, I wrote Burn Red Skies and Rise Red Kingdom, and, found really good friends in the indie community, indie fantasy. People started seeing my art and they got interested. It's like, hey, do you do book illustrations? So I do some book illustrations for indie fantasy.
That's great.
So I think art is still a huge part of my life. It's just, it's cool that I started writing because of it, but it was just my beginning. So I still do it. I think in the future I will try to illustrate my own books. It just never occurred to me at first because I'm a dope.
Sometimes we can't see those things closest to us, right?
Right. I just think it would be a great another stream of income, though, if you had merchandise or things like that. If you ever get to that point where because you can create all of that yourself. Me, unless people want some stick figures, they're not getting.
Jami and I are outsourcing that, definitely.
We are outsourcing all that. So yeah, I just think that's awesome. Plus, fantasy just plays into that so well. I just think you could do, that could be another stream of income for you at some point.
Yeah.
Let me put that on your list of things to do.
Yeah, because it's not stressful enough already.
No, you're not already busy enough.
Right? Writing is easy, right? Like marketing.
Yeah. In all your spare time, you can do that. Yeah. So when you say book illustrations, do you mean like maps or things like that in other people's books? What type of illustrations do you do?
Like full page illustrations of people's stories.
Oh wow.
Okay.
I did draw my own map. So that was one thing I learned with my second book, but not in my first one. That's one thing that I could say with confidence that in my first book, I didn't have a map because I didn't think people would be interested. And that was, I don't know what I was thinking.
Because fantasy readers love maps, right?
They love
I think if there were a genre where people like maps, it would be fantasy.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. Yeah. And you could do those, as lead magnets, or even your art as lead magnets. Sign up for my newsletter, get a drawing,
get the map. Yeah,
get the map, get the portrait of so and so, or whatever, or this, the city of whatever. I think you have so many ways to leverage that talent. Can
you tell we're a little jealous?
Yeah, we're a little jealous.
I'm like sweating. No.
Yeah. I'm like, if I could draw somebody, I would really cash in on that. But that's me. So, that's good.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I am just realized that I can combine drawing and writing. That will likely be in the cards in the future. I can't believe I hadn't thought about it.
You could do cards.
Yeah, we could do cards too.
Here, I'll be your marketing person. I'm just like I've got a bunch of ideas.
She got a lot of ideas. Well, I wanted to ask. I love maps. I'm not a fantasy reader, but I love maps. And so, if there are authors out there that want to do a map for their book or want to do their own map, would you have any tips for that? Any guidance, like things that they should watch out for or suggestions? Or would you recommend outsourcing that?
I mean, I foolishly thought I could draw my own map. And I think it turned out well given the circumstances. I have no sense of direction. So I was the worst person to draw this map. But as with the editor, I couldn't afford anything else. I think, my map is a block of land, by the way.
Yeah.
I think what I would do, this could be a lessons learned thing for my next series or my next book, is to pre-draw it on some sort of map software. Or just like if you're not artistically inclined, just use the map software.
Right.
I personally like the hand-drawn look, so that's what I went for. Just make sure it's viable and it matches your story.
Yeah.
My first draft of the map did not match my story. So I redrew it.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of great map artists who basically only draw maps. If you're not feeling confident, if you're not, happy with the map software you're using, definitely outsource. Like, don't be shy. They love maps.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good advice.
Yeah. I think it's very good advice. Yeah. Well, we have loved this. It's been so great. And I'm just so happy for your success and your, that you've gotten your words out into the world. I love that. But what do you think the best thing you've done to set yourself up for success has been?
I think it's a very personal thing that I've done for this. It's just sort of, I don't know how it was like with you as a new author back then, but I internalized everything. So all the criticism, all the negative feedback, actually, like it's kind of funny. I feel like I've gone through some sort of writer's rite of passage because someone actually really hated my book just so much that they tore it apart, but with passion.
Yes.
Like it's a weird mix. Like, yeah, like, of course, you love for people to engage with your work positively, but I think for me, it's more important to sort of reach and touch readers. Apparently in many ways, like, because that reviewer was just raging. But it affected them so much. And sort of that mentality switch, like, all right, it's a bad review in the sense that they thought the book was bad, not that the review itself was bad. But just sort of thinking, okay, it's a negative review, but it reached a reader it normally would not have reached, and that person what that person wanted to say was that book was just not for them. Right. So just that little mentality switch made all the difference for me, because it's like, all right, like someone hated it like passionately.
Well, you did evoke a lot of emotion, so that's good,
It's better than somebody saying, this book was just like you did get a reaction. But that is not our first reaction when someone's critical. My first reaction is to be hurt and upset. But like, if you can look past that and go, okay, that just wasn't for them, and it's okay. I think it's hard to get to that point.
Yeah, like it's especially hard when you're just starting out, especially if that's one of your first reviews, right?
Yeah.
You think, okay, like,
oh Lord,
it's like 3 people have reviewed my book. 1 is negative. Oh no.
I'm surprised you continued. I mean, that is just hard. That is just so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. But what are you going to do?
What are you going to do? You have to, I mean, my kids, we did this thing where we lived in Austin. And so they had a lot of filming stuff that was going on. And my kids, we were doing this commercial, and they picked one of my daughters to have kind of a more primary role than the other one. She was older, and the younger one, of course, was a little upset. And I said, it has nothing to do with you. You know how in the mornings you go in and you look in your sock drawer and you want to wear your pink socks, you pass your green socks, your white socks, your blue socks until you get to the pink socks. It's not that you don't like those other socks. You just wanted the pink socks. And that was how this was too. They just weren't looking for the blue sock. They were looking for the pink sock. And I've sort of had to do the same thing, like, it's just not my reader. It's just not my reader.
And just wanted different socks.
Yeah, they just want different socks, damn it. Sorry, Sarah.
Like I actually have a review diet. So I only read reviews like at most once a month.
Yeah.
I have like that cheat day. Because like it's a rabbit hole, I think.
Yeah,
it is.
Like once you start,
I've stopped reading them too. Yeah.
I think I read them more often after a release. I mean, I've only released 2 books, but I've read them like consistently every day for like maybe the first 10 reviews or 20, you know. And if somebody has something negative to say, usually they'll say it within those 20 reviews.
Yes.
Assuming you haven't asked 20 relatives to write down.
That's right.
Which wasn't the case here. So so you know, just to see if there's a negative trend, like maybe something's problematic, you know, I'm accidentally offending a lot of people or something. But if it's more or less mixed or, you know, just like subjective, then I just let it go and read at most once a month. I think now it's once every two or three.
I don't know. I can't tell you when the last time I read a review was. Of course, when we get off here, I'll probably go read them all. But I just had to. I mean, most of my reviews are positive, but it's the meh ones that I can't stand. Like if somebody just hates it, that's one thing. But it's the ones that are like, it was okay. Like, oh my gosh.
It's like,
how much time I put into this. It's just okay. Yeah. So those are the ones that hurt. So I just don't read them.
I would like to evoke emotion.
Just exactly.
Yeah, like I'd rather have like I'd rather have a rage review than like, you know, a review accusing the book of being mediocre. Which I mean, maybe for some people it is mediocre, but it just stings a different way, you know?
It does.
Yeah. I love that you called it a diet, that you are limiting yourself, which I do that. I don't read, I go in every once in a while and check and see, but I think that's really smart to kind of have that mind frame. Because
I think it's also quite indulgent to read reviews, especially the positive ones. You know, you get sort of it goes to your head, even the negative ones, obviously, that it is kind of a vice and it's kind of a rabbit hole. And if you don't check yourself, which I didn't at first, I went crazy, that it could be quite dangerous and it could affect your writing from that point on.
Yes.
No, I agree.
Very true.
I agree 100%. Yeah.
True.
Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So tell people where they can find out more about you. Where's the best place to go?
I do have a website that I haven't updated in a while, but I will after this interview. It's ke-rosero.com. But the best way to reach me is Instagram and Twitter. That's where I post all my book news, some of my art, as well as book photographs.
Awesome. Perfect.
Awesome.
Well, this has been great. Thank you for taking the time to do this. And we'll have all the links at wishidknownthenpodcast.com. And thanks to Alexa Larberg for editing and producing the podcast. And thanks to Adriel Wiggins for the admin. See everybody next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. We hope this episode inspired you, empowered you, and made you laugh a little bit too. If you loved it, tell your friends about it. And if you feel so inclined, leave us a review. We look forward to being with you again next week.